So I would ask the court to sentence the defendant at the higher end of the guidelines. We don't see these kinds of serious violent offenses very frequently in Kalkaska County. And I think it's important that the court send a message both to this defendant and to the community at large that when these kinds of crimes do get committed, they are punished severely so that they do not continue to occur. Thank you.
Mr. Stickney, if you can go right to the podium there next to your attorney. We'll go on the record in People versus Nathan Stickney. This is case number 244937. If I could have counsel put your chances on.
Brian Ziegler, on behalf of people, Your Honor.
Kyle Travis on behalf of Mr. Stickney.
Record should reflect again, Mr. Stickney is present here in the courtroom today. This is the date and time set for sentencing. Mr. Stickney, did you have a chance to go through the pre-sentence report and talk to Mr. Travis about that?
I did.
Mr. Travis, are there any additions, deletions, or corrections to that report?
No, Your Honor.
Are there any challenges to the scoring of the guidelines?
There are not.
Mr. Ziegler, do the people have any additions, deletions, or corrections?
No, Your Honor.
Any challenges to the scoring? Do you have any victims that wish to address the court today?
Your Honor, the victim Raymond Jensen would like his wife and the mother of the defendant, Loretta, to speak on his behalf.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Travis, if you and your client can be seated at council table. All right, good morning, ma'am. Loretta is your first name, is that?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell me your last name?
Jensen.
Loretta Jensen, okay. And you're Mr. Stickney's mother?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and you're married to Raymond, who is listed as the victim in this case, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell me what is it that you would like to say here today?
Well, Your Honor, the person that committed the crime by kicking in the door and pointing a weapon at my husband is not the person that I know and I raised. He was entirely different that night. And I really personally don't feel that prison is going to improve the matter any. I would suggest that there be a way found where he can be rehabilitated with a lot of counseling and help from the powers that be. When he's normal, which is sober and working, he's entirely different than that person that I saw. He's calm, he's fun-loving, caring, but that one I saw that night is not who I know. That was a total stranger. And it frankly scared the hell out of me, pardon the court. But no, jail wouldn't do any good. It'd make it worse, the prison time. So I request that respectfully, you see that he has a trade with a certification, the counseling he needs to get over the anger issues he has and help straighten him out. He will be a benefit to society if you do these things. And that's both my husband and my attitude and our request. So please take that under advisement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your statement here today. Mr. Ziegler, you can go ahead and thank you. Mr. Travis, if you and your client want to come back up to the stand. Mr. Ziegler, did you have any other folks that wanted to address the court?
No, Your Honor.
Anything on behalf of the people for allocation?
Your Honor, the only thing I would note in terms of the other victims, Amber Stickney was a victim on this case on one of the charges that was dropped. She's asked that the no contact order be lifted so that she can make some arrangements regarding their property, some of his property, some mutual property. I don't think that would apply once he's sentenced to MDOC, but to the extent that the court feels it would continue to apply, just want to make the court aware of that request. I think it's appropriate under the circumstances that be lifted. In terms of the elocution, Your Honor, we often come in here at the time of sentencing and bemoan the fact that the guidelines are low and do not adequately address the severity of the offense. This case is not one of those, Your Honor. The defendant comes before you nearly maxed on the PRVs and maxed on the OVs on a B-grade felony. The guidelines are 99 to 160 months. And believe it or not, that's still of a significant benefit to the defendant that was negotiated as part of the plea. The maximum on his original charge of assault with intent to murder and the habitual fourth, the way I calculated it, would have been 225 months to life. So the defendant, despite having very high guidelines, still has reaped the benefit of a plea agreement in this case. There are little to no redeeming or mitigating circumstances here with regard to this circumstance, Your Honor. The defendant's record is quite lengthy. This would be his 11th felony, and he has also 11 misdemeanors. The defendant's incarcerated history is not the longest I've ever seen, but it's still not fantastic. The course of conduct at issue in this case, Your Honor, is appalling. The defendant rammed his wife's vehicle multiple times, assaulted her via strangulation for several minutes, and then went next door to his father-in-law's house and attempted to kill him. He kicked in the door. He announced his intent to kill his father-in-law based on my reading of the reports and what's contained in the PSI, Your Honor. But for the fact that there was a struggle over the defendant, it's my belief that Mr. Jensen would have been shot. That course of conduct resulted in 9 felony charges and a habitual fourth offender notice. There's simply no justifying or mitigating that type of behavior, Your Honor. It's totally unwarranted. It resulted in injury to 2 people, and the defendant is very fortunate that no one was killed or no one was more seriously injured as a result of his behavior that evening. The guidelines are 99 to 160. They're higher than I've seen on a case in quite some time, but they're totally warranted given the facts and circumstances of this case. And I can see no reason for the court to give him the benefit of the doubt and sentence him on the lower end of those guidelines. I know the defendant's family does not want to see him go to prison, and in certain circumstances, on certain cases, I'm sympathetic to those requests, Your Honor. But given what the course of conduct is in this case, given the defendant's record in this case, I don't see that I or the court has any choice in the matter. So I would ask the court to sentence the defendant at the higher end of the guidelines. We don't see these kinds of serious violent offenses very frequently in Kalkaska County. And I think it's important that the court send a message both to this defendant and to the community at large that when these kinds of crimes do get committed, they are punished severely so that they do not continue to occur. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Travis.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, Mr. Ziegler pointed the guidelines to the higher charge. We did accept a plea bargain, and that was one issue that, I don't know, the jury would have decided. It's alluded to in the report, I think at 2 different points. One point makes it quite clear that Mr. Stickney, when he discharged the firearm, he was outside of the house and that was in the air, not in a person. So I would argue that obviously that would be for the jury to decide with the assault with intent to murder. He never tried to actually fire the gun at his stepfather. I would contend from reading the report, he had that opportunity, but didn't do it after, granted, a struggle ensued, but he could have fired off the gun. Now that's not the largest issue here, but I think it's a distinction because he did, as bad as the situation was, he did even in that instant calm down and basically abandon whatever attempt he was trying to do or whatever he was trying to do, which is, it doesn't minimize everything, but I think it is an important distinction. He never fired that gun at anybody. He obviously committed the crimes that he pled to. Obviously, this was a very bad situation. The guidelines are high, but I want to point that out, that by all accounts, he didn't try and shoot anybody specifically. Now, there may have been statements that he was going to. Obviously, he came into a house with a gun. There's a reason he pled to these things, but when the rubber met the road, this wasn't a firing and a missing type. It wasn't just fate and luck that his stepfather is here with us today. And I think that's important, particularly if we're going to take into account the guidelines of the attempted murder when thinking about this. I would also note, I think it's not an aberration just out of family love that the victim in this case and his family members are supportive of him. I've represented a lot of folks in Kalkaska County charged with very concerning types of crimes and very concerning types of situations. And what I've pointed out to Mr. Ziegler and I've noted time and time again, almost every person I've dealt with in a situation like Mr. Stickney is still just dripping with rage as they're in the jail. Nathan has never been angry at anyone about this. He's always been remorseful and understanding that he made a mistake and that this shouldn't have happened. Even when he comes and he talks to the police shortly thereafter in the interview, he doesn't completely agree with what everybody says, but he basically tells them exactly what happened. And he's reasonable, and he's not a bouncing ball of rage. And I can't express to the court how different that is than pretty much every other person accused of something highly violent like this I've ever represented. Some of them, by the time they get to this point, are relaxed and reasonable, but I never got that from Mr. Stickney at all. And then I even go back and watch the videos. He wasn't even that way right after this happened. So I think to his mother's point, we do have someone who was taken to not being who they are normally when they did this. It doesn't excuse it, but he is not a ball of rage. He is rational, he is reasonable, he understands he shouldn't have done this, he is remorseful, and he's been that way the whole time. And sadly, Your Honor, that's something of an aberration for a crime this serious, for people I've dealt with. And I can't stress enough how, as much as this is not going to be great, how encouraging that is to me for Mr. Stickney and his future. So he's got things he wants to do. He's got family. He understands this is not going to be good, but he's looking to the future. And I truly think, having talked with him a number of times and dealt with him, that this was not who he is. This was something he regrets. And I would ask the court to take into account that the victims don't want him sent away for as long as the court can. As bad as it was, ultimately, nobody got seriously hurt. And the folks who are the victims of this want him to just get help. And he does have family out there that he's very hopeful to get back and be a good part of and be a good member of our community. His record doesn't look good. Many of those were failure to register situations. I mean, his record seems by numbers atrocious, but when you really get into it, as Mr. Ziegler indicated, it doesn't really have this massive history of incarceration or this endless road. And he was, for a long time in this community, a reliable mechanic that people liked and thought well of, and was I know people were sad to see him taken out of his job and then as a good mechanic in the community. Not that means that Your Honor, should really do anything less, but he was doing very well, being a good member of society for the past couple of years. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Mr. Stickney, anything you wanted to say today?
Yeah, just a few things. I'd like to apologize to my mother, stepfather, wife, and all those else involved in the incident that night. And sorry for my actions and the way I acted. Just looking forward to get to my grave. So that's it, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Mr. Stickney, I did read through the report in this case, so I'm familiar with the facts of what happened through the information in that report. The report also has a lot of information about you and your background and history and so forth, which I did review as well. And I take all of that information into account. Ms. Jensen, I appreciate your comments here today on behalf of yourself and your husband. And I certainly can empathize with you as a parent. I think family members always have a different view of individuals because they've seen them in all kinds of different contexts throughout their life. And I can appreciate that you see much more in Mr. Stickney than what just happened in this particular incident. And I certainly do take your comments and your point of view into account, as well as what the lawyers have had to say. And, you know, there's a couple things that stand out to me. You know, number one, Mr. Stickney, you do have a significant past history of convictions between your juvenile and adult history. You've been on probation 8 times. You've had a number of different jail sentences. I agree with counsel. A lot of those have been, you know, technical failures to comply with reporting. But there certainly are some assaultive crimes in your history. And you certainly have had many opportunities through probation and lesser sanctions to correct your behavior and to figure out what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And none of those things have worked up until now. And your record is what it is. And I say that because it tells me something about the indications, what we can expect going forward. And in terms of rehabilitation, there have already been a lot of efforts at that over the course of your life. And that, in addition to the dangerousness of the conduct that you engaged in this circumstance, and the fact that you got to the point where you were in a position to be able to kill someone, indicate to me that rehabilitation has to take a back seat in this case. And what needs to happen is the court needs to look more at the protection of the community, the safety of the community. And I agree with Mr. Ziegler's statements regarding deterrent effect, that this is conduct that just can't be tolerated in anybody, regardless of their history or circumstances. And the court has an interest in making people in the community aware that this kind of conduct is going to be dealt with in a very serious way, and that there are serious consequences to it. And in particular, for someone like yourself, who's had a number of opportunities at rehabilitation along the way, and it hasn't happened. Looking at the guidelines here, which are 99 months to 160 months, the court has really no basis to go below the guidelines or lower than what the guidelines call for. The court finds that an appropriate sentence would be in the middle of the guidelines. The court is going to sentence you to 120 months in the Michigan Department of Corrections to 20 years. You do have credit for 186 days served. Again, that court finds that sentence number 1 is in the middle of the guidelines. I think it's reasonable. I think it accomplishes the goals of deterrence and punishment in this case. The court is also going to order a crime victims assessment of $130, court costs of $325, attorney fees of $350, the $68 state costs. The court is also going to lift any no contact orders that are currently in place. Given the statements of the family here today, I don't believe that those are necessary or appropriate at this point. You do have the ability to seek an appeal of this sentence, and Travis is going to provide you with some papers that explain to you how to request an appeal, as well as how to request a court-appointed lawyer to help you with an appeal. Travis, you can provide those to Mr. Stickney, please. Mr. Stickney, are remanded to the custody of the state.